Welcome, everybody. This is Avoiding the Addiction Affliction brought to you by Westwards Consulting, the Kenosha County Substance Use Disorder Coalition, and by a grant from the state of Wisconsin's Dose of Reality Real Talks, reminding you that opioids are powerful drugs and that one pill can kill. I'm Mike McGowan. A landmark new study published earlier this year in the Journal of American Medical Association Internal Medicine examined the self-reported mental health of nearly 200,000 female parents across the nation between 2016 and 2023. I was stunned by this. Only about 26% of moms reported excellent mental health in 2023 compared to about 38%. So we're down 15% in 2016. We're going to discuss that topic and much more with our guest today, Sheng Lee Yang. Sheng is the founder and executive director of Us Two Behavioral Healthcare in Appleton, Wisconsin. Sheng is a licensed clinical social worker and perinatal mental health therapist, which we'll get into. She's a former professor who taught social justice issues, mental health, and advocacy to social work students. She's also a first generation Hmong refugee, and most importantly, a proud mom. Welcome,
Thank
Sheng.
you. Thank you for having me. I am a proud mom, especially as we are gearing up the next school year, right?
I
It's
know.
it's always such a good time to kind of see your kids grow up, but also sending that they're growing up. And those are the things that nobody ever tells you about as parents.
I did a freshman orientation last night in a school district with parents and kids, and one of the seniors was like, "It goes so fast." And the mom said, "Not fast enough." So it's good.
Yeah, give her until the end of the school year.
I know, I know.
Yeah.
Well, Shane, tell us about Us Two Behavioral Health Care.
Yeah, so we opened doors in September 2019. So a couple of weeks, or next week actually, we'll be hitting our 6 year anniversary. It was an idea that was kind of incubated between my partner and I. His background is in business finance. And, you know, in 2017, maybe 16, I can't remember anymore. He and I were really exploring about, we were kind of at the top of our careers and we talk about this American dream, right? And, at that time, he and I we really felt like we were there. We were in roles that from an outsider perspective would be really successful, right? But he and I kept having conversations about like, what is next? Do you just go to
Hmm.
work every day, collect your paycheck and come home? And is there more to life? But we were also at a stage where we were really planning our family and what does this community look like for us as we age and we raise our children. So anyhow, long story short, we knew we wanted to stay in the Fox Cities area of Wisconsin and wanted it to be a good place for our children, but also with our professional careers, recognizing some of the gaps. And that was culturally inclusive access to behavioral health care. And so he and I incubated this idea. 2019, we opened doors, and here we are, right? Almost 6 years old with 26 FTEs, I think now, and our like fifth facility. Yeah.
That's huge. As I was reading about Us, I'm curious. Us Two, you named it purpose. Tell why the name?
Yeah, so it was intentional and it wasn't. Okay. So initially I wanted it to be us two TOO because
Hmm.
our populations are marginalized communities that are typically perceived as second class citizens, right? So initially it was supposed to be us two, the correctly grammar way to spell it. But funny story, when I went to file, there was a trucking company with that name already. So I thought, oh, of course, right? And my mentor at that time, who was with SCORE, was like, well, we have some options. You can call them up and ask them to change their name. I'm like, right, this trucking company is just gonna change their name because I want the name. So I really thought long and hard about it. I thought, if the intention behind it, right, is that our population served are second class citizen, then I'll just throw in the number two.
Wow.
So that's how I came to be.
I think it's great. And I love that it was designed so right in your name, you're talking about the people who have difficulty accessing. We'll get into that in a minute. In the
Yeah.
introduction, Shane, I mentioned the study from the AMA. You're not surprised at those numbers based on what I've read.
No, I'm not surprised by those numbers at all. In fact, I think that those numbers really reflect what I see. And I think, in our practice, we see every day, especially with mothers and parents. the pressures, right, on moms and female parents have really intensified over the past several years. I mean, you think about balancing caregiving, right, work and household responsibilities, and we see parents or who are in what we would call our sandwich generation, right, where we're caregivers to our children and our aging parents. So when you combine all of these stressors, I'm really not surprised that mom's mental health or female parents' mental health has declined despite this increased awareness of mental health and well-being.
You know, you mentioned what they're concerned about, and I read that you said that you've noticed that what young moms are concerned about has shifted from their kids to just make and do.
Yes, it's not so much just the parenting piece, right? I mean, having a child, it definitely a baby or a child definitely changes roles and expectations, but a shift in basic needs. You and I know, and we all know, right, that childcare centers are closing, right?
Yep.
There's a decrease in professionals or young people entering the education, discipline, and profession. We know that the cost of living in general is going up. We know that housing, right,
Oh,
options, right, are just declining while interest rates increase. And so when you think about just the very basic needs to be alive for yourself, right? And yet alone another child or another human being, of course that that mental health and well-being is going to decrease while the needs are going up. And systemically, we don't have enough to go around.
yeah. And tack on to that, I think, right? A little bit of stigma. I don't even know what to do with those people. And they're loud. I don't know how numerous they are, but they're loud. The people who say, well, then you shouldn't have had children. Or the other one would, well, just stay at home and take care of your kids. Uh, uh, you know,
Right. I'm willing to bet that most moms, because we're talking about female parents here, would love to stay home with their kids. But again, economically, it's not affordable, right? And so then as we talk about also going back to school,
yes.
we cannot deny the fact that there is school violence. And as a parent, as a mother myself, knowingly that I am sending my children, my young children who are still in elementary and middle school, to an environment that is not safe. And in America here, we have normalized and become complicit to school violence. So that is a compounded stressor for, of course, moms. I mean, I certainly can't speak for every mom, but I know the folks that enter my office and are in my community or the people I work with, there's a huge component and stress and anxiety about like, holy crap, I am literally sending my children to an unsafe environment for the purposes of learning.
Hmm. Yeah. And for the listeners, we should say that we're recording this the day after the Minnesota shooting in the
Yes,
church. And yeah, which I think since August 1st, I read today, Shane, that it's the fifth school shooting since August 1st. And this one is in a church. So if you're a young parent, you're like, well, if my kids aren't safe praying in a church,
right.
I'm,
Absolutely. And then you think about the educators, right? Many educators are
yes.
female parents. And so you have this compounded trauma, organizational and systematic trauma that we are expecting essentially out of female parents
Yeah.
that they have no control over.
Well, and I think that's a big part, right? What can you control? And you just mentioned a whole bunch of things they can't control. The cost of housing, which is, I have kids in post-college age, right? And I feel so bad for that generation. Unless you're getting help, how do you afford to buy a home at this point? Because the
No,
housing is out of control, right?
the housing market and inventory is out of control.
Hmm.
The cost of it is
Yep.
out of control. And so when we take a step back and we say, well, why is it that people have worse mental health despite having more awareness and less stigma because of that awareness? Well, because now we've shifted blame to the individual despite systematic issues, and that creates then internalization and internal stigma now. So before, when we talk about mental health, it was this external stigma of like there's not a lot of awareness, so people can't talk about it, and now we're talking about it but there's no resources because the issue is so systematic.
Oh, that's fascinating. And then when we shift it to the individual, then that adds to the stigma because if it's your fault, then I'm even less likely to talk about it if I think I'm going to get the blame for my own mental health.
Right, because as you mentioned, because there's this perception that you had these children, they're your responsibilities. Absolutely. I don't want anybody else to raise my
Right,
kids.
right.
Like, I don't trust people to raise my kids at this rate. But at the same time, people don't have resources to raise kids. And it's the very basic function of human beings. We know that what makes us different as animals from the animal kingdom and every other animal is that we are meant to be social creatures,
Social. Mhm.
right? Like we are meant to be born in tribes, die in tribes, and have a village. But we have created a system that is so individualized that folks are now internalizing that they're the problem, where really it's the world that we've created.
Mm. So that's people in general, but add to that, your work focuses on, I know you treat everybody, but your work focuses on underserved populations.
Mhm.
Talk about the additional challenges they have.
Yes. The additional challenges that I see a lot with our marginalized populations is one, the very first basic, right, is that the continuous questioning of their existence here in the United States. That's just like the very basic of like I don't even feel safe to walk outside because I'm an immigrant. I'm, a trans mom. I'm Black African American. I'm Hispanic. I'm Hmong. So let's just start there. When we think
Mhm.
about, some challenges is like constantly being questioned about their existence here in the United States. And then on top of that, you add access to resources like have talked about. You add discrimination, you add transportation, closure of child care centers. We cannot talk about marginalized communities without thinking about hours of operations within their places of work, right? We assume everybody works, 8 to 4, 9 to 5. Now, mind you, school ends at 3,
Right.
right? Right. And so the additional challenges of simply being born an immigrant or a different race or different gender or having different family dynamics and constantly being questioned about your existence is going to create some internalization and some questioning about like, yeah, why am I here?
And I would assume that a lot of your patients don't exactly have Cadillac insurance coverage for mental health or
No,
addiction.
no, absolutely not. And it's interesting. A lot of folks don't know this, but for a long time, health insurance were not obligated to cover addiction. This actually only became law in here in the United States in, I think it was like 2012 or 2013.
Right.
It's wild. And so when we think about addiction and moms, I mean, yeah, health insurance coverage really doesn't cover it. And then you think about health disparities in marginalized communities. You don't have a lot of folks who are culturally informed. And even though they say they are, they're probably not really because they've taken a 2 hour CEU credit on it, right? Right. They've checked
Uh,
off that box,
that's yep.
even though it requires more internal work than just attending a 2 hour workshop, in transportation. And even from a provider perspective, the wait list goes for miles.
Yeah.
You know,
You made me laugh a little bit. One of my, it's not a pet peeve, but it's a funny observation, and I don't want to get off too much on this tangent, is when you look in Psychology Today for a therapist or whatever, and underneath them, I am skilled at, and the list is so long. It's like, okay, you're 29 years old. You can't possibly be expert in all of this, right?
right.
But I
Yeah.
think that's just to get patients and to get coverage.
Yes, yes. And I know you said you didn't want to go on this tangent for a long time, but I think I'm glad we are talking about it because I
Yeah,
think maybe I'm assuming here, maybe a lot of your listeners and folks are from the mental health perspective or background as well as that. I don't know if anybody could ever say that they're culturally competent because cultures just change, people change, and we know that generations change, right? And as generations change, cultures change. And so you really have to be willing to deep dive into that work.
absolutely. Well, you also work a lot with young people.
Hmm.
And they face, I think, I spend a lot of time with young people. I talk a lot, about 100,000 kids a year I end up talking to. There's a skill gap that is visible when you meet with young people as far as coping skills and taking care of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say absolutely, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense that we feel though as though young people are lacking a little bit in coping skills. Now, think about for a minute this idea of like generational transmission and generational trauma. So we just talked about parents and female parents, right? And if they're traumatized because the system is traumatizing and the parents, and again, in our case, our conversation here, female parents are coping with drinking alcohol, using prescription pills, and they have kids. What do you think is being transmitted to the children? Not
Exactly.
the coping skills, right? And if the parents don't have answers, how are the kids supposed to have answers? And so it's not rocket science. And I don't want to say it's intentional, but it's obvious because if we wouldn't expect a child to know French because they've never learned French, we can't expect young people and children to know coping skills if their parents in the systems are not teaching them coping skills or the coping skills are maladaptive in nature.
Before I ended up speaking last night, I looked at the group. I'm talking to people, and it was about, well, obviously about half kids, half parents, and there's about 300 people there. The people with the phones in their lap, for the most part, were the parents.
Mhm.
The kids were talking to one another, but the
Yeah.
parents were not engaged. And that's not untypical, where you're spending more time on a screen than face to face, where, right, listening comes in, asking questions, problem solving, conflict resolution. And I
Yeah.
assume those are all topics that you talk about with young people so that they develop that skill base.
Yes, absolutely. We think about what are coping skills that maybe you were taught or given in early life, and what are the new ones that maybe you can try, conflict resolution, anger management, all of those pieces. But from a neurobiology perspective, we have to take accountability for the dopamine flood that we have given to young people
Mm.
with electronics. And I'm not preaching like I'm a perfect parent. I mean, my kids have electronics, and I know I'm fully accountable to that and responsible for that dopamine flood. But these are the things that we have to think about. Okay, why are our kids so glued to electronics? Or why is that their coping skills? Because from a neurobiology perspective, again, it's that dopamine. And so when they're not constantly on their phone, when they don't have access to 15 of their friends on social media, they are going to demonstrate some withdrawal symptoms because that's essentially the root of addiction.
Well, and then if you are that connected, it doesn't take much to be offended or to feel
Mhm.
slighted or bullied or whatever you want to call it. And those are permanent scars, much more than arguing in the hallway 30 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely right. And there's more access to this information being spread. If there's
Yep.
a bully in the school and they're taking pictures or videos of bullying a student or a child and they're posting it on social media, I mean, that's going to get spread really quick across that school. But also, we can't talk about children's mental health or young people's mental health without taking into consideration the impact of COVID-19 on them.
Yes.
Because some of our, 12th graders now, right? You think about 6 years ago, they were in sixth grade, and because of COVID, their way of life was completely wiped from them, right? Going to school, right? Interacting with their peers, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. One student is here today, the other student's not here the next day. Our expectations of them really changed. We plopped them in front of a screen for online schooling and normalized that for so long. And then on top of COVID, there's this compound, right, of parents separating. Maybe mom or dad developed addiction. You can't see grandma or grandpa or your cousins during Christmas time. I mean, all of these things impact our little minds. And then now we're just like, oh, go back into life like nothing ever happened. Again, we talked about this as well as school shootings. Do we really think that we're sending our kids to school knowing that there's an increase in school violence and that our kids are just supposed to be like, oh, okay, we can't. I mean, my second grader yesterday was telling me on the way home from school and meeting her teacher, Mom, I'm really scared about a bad guy
Mm.
coming into school and because they have these drills. And it's her fear is valid. And as a mom, I have no solution. I feel powerless.
What do you do then? I think that's a situation a lot of parents are in, and a lot of them blow it off like, oh, you're okay. You'll be okay. which is not a empathetic response and
No.
tends to make the kid bury it. So how would you respond if your second grade child says, I'm a little scared because a bad
Yeah.
guy would come in?
Yeah. I tell her, like, I know, honey, it is scary, and mommy is scared for you too. And I don't know, but what I do know is that your teacher and your principal and everybody who works in that school is going to try their best to make sure that you're safe because that's all I know, right?
Well, right. And that goes back to the training. So talk about your perinatal mental health training.
Yeah. Yep. So this training is a 4 hour in nature long training, but it really focuses on the populations of not just after childbirth, but also challenges with fertility all the way to about like 24 months postpartum. And it really explores and brings into light the challenges of motherhood, parenthood, between a biological perspective, so the changes in hormones, but also raising awareness about mental health conditions as a result of pregnancy, trying to get pregnant, and parenthood. And so oftentimes people think about perinatal mental health and parenting as a mom's issue. But I do want to raise awareness, especially around fathers as well, and the criticalness around the fatherhood engagement and father's mental health. And so the training looks at explores men's mental health and mother's mental health as well. And also, right, our LGBTQ population and our non-binary parenting as well and their experiences. But the goal of it is to raise awareness about, hey, as a clinician, as a human services provider, as a friend, as a colleague, these are things that may surface or manifest after somebody has a baby or brings a baby into the home. Whether it is role changes or challenges with well-being, again, hormonal changes. And what do we do about it? What are some solutions? If I'm a therapist and I'm seeing this, what do I do? If I'm a human services provider, what do I do? If I'm a neighbor, if I'm a mom, right?
Well, how do people find that training and sign up for it?
Yep, so they can go onto our website and we have an on-demand, asynchronous workshop that's available out there. It is CEU approved. So folks can either take it on the website and register there. Otherwise, periodically, a couple of times a year, we do offer the community offerings.
I think that's outstanding. And I found this part fascinating too. I was reading an article where you were interviewed and you were talking about culturally specific therapy being important and that it's difficulty sometimes getting funded under the traditional Western approach for things like racism. And can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, when we think about access to mental health, we know that typically folks require insurance for that. And if you are going to be utilizing your insurance for that, it has to be what is considered a billable diagnosis. And those diagnoses are based on then certain criteria, and it's very medical in nature. But it also is very individually based. In fact, PTSD is the only mental health disorder that requires an external circumstance. Everything else is internal. So when I talk about that, like with PTSD, you have to either been exposed or witness somebody in a traumatic event. Every other disorder is more internal. Something happened to you, you're the problem. So when we think about like racialized trauma, when we think about the lack of access to resources and the lack of power to make changes in your own life with systematic issues, those things are not billable under insurance because that's not a us problem, that's a you problem. Does that make sense? And so because the DSM and the way that insurance works right now is that we will only pay for you problem, not us problem, it's not going to be billable, such as racialized trauma.
Okay, we do have a lot of therapists listening to this, and I'm sure they're nodding their heads. How do you get around that?
Yeah.
Do you have to code it differently so that you're make sure that it's covered? And then, that's playing a little bit of a game.
Yeah, as a therapist, it's always this balance between compliance versus justice. And that's the crap that nobody teaches you in school, right? I mean, we can have a whole nother conversation
Yeah,
about
we should.
like,
That's why I'm laughing. I'm like, oh, there's
right?
another podcast right there.
So when I code it, right, I look at symptoms and do these symptoms meet certain criteria, whether it's generalized anxiety disorder or adjustment disorder or depression. But I know the root cause of it is because of these systematic issues that we know through data and research people have no control over. We know that through research and literature, only about 30 to 40% of someone's actual life choices is going to impact their quality of life and how long they live. So you flip that. 70% of someone's life is impacted through policies, through access to resources, through things that they have no control over. That's why I say, honey, eat that cake, forget the gym, you can't control it. It's all through systems that you and I have no power over. I mean,
Well, and think about what you said earlier about how fractured we are as a society right now and how we're adding to those external things, like you don't belong here or who you are is not relevant as a human being.
yep, absolutely. Yep. Like I said, it's so fascinating in a bad way that we have created a society that has completely dismissed the very core functions of being human for the purposes of, I'm not really sure.
And yet, when people find you and others and get help, despite the obstacles, the success stories are incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenges as being a clinician is that in my work, I see people for the most part, individually, and we do work in my office and it's great. But internally, I know I'm sending them back into an environment and a system that is not created and designed for them to thrive. And that's one of the biggest hurdles and challenges that I internalize oftentimes. But also, I think one of the biggest positive things about my role as a clinician and something that I find deeply rewarding and keeps me doing what I'm doing is that I also get to experience the joy and the positive improvements and the basic human functions of being human with other people. And I don't think every discipline gets to experience that, right?
Oh, that's a great response. I love that. That is true. Yeah, what changes would you make if you could, if you had the power?
Oh, I don't know if this is going to be appropriate for your show, Mike. Honestly, if I had the power and I could make any change to the world, honestly, like I would bring peace, joy, and love to the world. And I say that as we wrap up here in summary in really in remembrance of my late father is, he
Mm.
always said, no matter what, always remember peace and love. Because no matter the hate and how much hate there is out there, peace and love will destroy all. And so I think if I had the power to change anything, I think I would bring peace and love to the world. And I think just between those two, everything else would follow. And those, again, are very basic human functions that many of us have kind of put to the back burner.
Wow. Well, that's not only appropriate for the show. I'd put that in a box with a ribbon around it if we could do that. Shang, I'm so glad you could join us today. This has been awesome. This is so delightful to talk about. For those of you who listen, you know that there are links to us to behavioral health on our website, and Shang's work is on there, her socials, all of the articles that I referenced earlier. We hope that you are able to find love, hope, peace, courage, support wherever you are. As always, thanks for listening and be safe.